Great. Well, hi everybody to people who have joined so far. We're just a minute before the top of the hour. We're gonna give people just another minute or two before we officially kick off this event. But thanks so much for joining, and we're excited to have people. Oh, such a great crowd joining. I have a lot of folks, which is wonderful. Okay, just another comment here as we have people continuing to join. We will be starting momentarily, so thank you everybody for continuing to log in and join us on this very pertinent topic that we'll be talking about today. So thank you all.
I see Hugo here from Brazil. He runs our Brazil chapter. He's one of our superstar chapter heads. Brazil is an incredible chapter. Hi, Hugo.
Hi, Raj. How are you doing?
Hi. Good, good. Good to see you. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, we will be together next week.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
So, but
that's great.
Being with you and Bob is always a very, very great pleasure. So, hi, Bob.
Thank you.
Nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I did something for Brazil earlier this week, something called Prospera 2020. In a pretty large event.
You know, we launched it last Thursday, the Imperative 21 in Brazil in conjunction with B Corp. So this is booming. Everybody's talking about.
That is wonderful. They had a full page ad in the New York Times.
Yeah.
One there. And they have a new reset. I think they're calling it Reset, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Reset.
The Great Reset. The Great Reset is the title for the World Economic Forum next year.
Oh.
So this year is we need to reset the capitalism. So it's a way of doing it.
Perfect.
We're still getting some folks, Kelly, coming in the waiting room. So I'm going to suggest we give it a few more minutes just to let people come in.
Sure. Just take another moment or two here at the top, just to let people join. Looks like a good crowd is amassing, which is what we were hoping for today. So thank you for everybody joining. Maybe what I will do is just go ahead and I am gonna, when I open, just with a couple of remarks, I'm just gonna briefly kind of share a couple of slides with everybody. So just to kind of kick things off. Bob, do you think we're ready to go ahead? Okay, I think we'll go ahead and start. So thank you everyone for joining. We're thrilled to have you join us for this very pertinent topic of talking about conscious culture. We're thrilled to have two fantastic speakers today. So I'm Kelly Tuning. I am a member of the board for the Boston chapter, and I head up marketing and programming for our chapter. Today we're focusing on one of the four tenets of conscious capitalism, conscious culture, and I think we've recruited two of probably the best minds and best people, maybe even, to talk to us about that topic. So they're going to bring their perspective and their expertise. Our first speaker is Raj Sisodia. He's the co-founder of Conscious Capitalism and co-author of the book by that same name. And then more recently, he has written the book, The Healing Organization, where he advocates for the idea that done right, business can alleviate suffering and elevate joy in our lives while still delivering great business performance. And so we're excited to hear about that informing conscious culture. And then the second speaker is Bob Chapman. He's the CEO of Barry-Wehmiller. And for anybody that is not familiar with Bob and Barry-Wehmiller, the best recommendation I can make is to read the book that he and Raj co-wrote a few years back now called Everybody Matters. The company of Barry-Wehmiller is a $3 billion global supplier of manufacturing technology and solutions serving a wide array of different businesses and industries. More importantly, though, as Bob writes in the book, the machinery that they build is just the economic engine that enables them to touch lives. And the flourishing of those lives is their paramount concern. So clearly a very caring culture that he has been able to foster and cultivate at Barry-Wehmiller. So we're thrilled that he'll be sharing his expertise in that arena. For those of you that might be new to the Boston chapter of Conscious Capitalism, I thought I would just really briefly introduce you to our purpose and our vision. So our purpose is to connect, educate, and inspire leaders and workers to consciously build businesses. And then our vision is we will foster the fundamental transformation of capitalism to a healthy, balanced way of doing business for all people and the planet. And then I also just wanted to recognize the wonderful corporate members we have as part of the Boston chapter. I won't go through them all individually by name, but they're all listed here, and we're grateful for each of these members and their continued support and involvement in the mission of our chapter. And I think we have a number of folks from these companies on the call today, which is great. And then finally, our agenda for the day. So I will be wrapping up in just a moment here, and I'll turn the mic over to Raj and Bob to talk about caring culture. And then we will have a period of Q&A. Please feel free to submit your questions via the chat function, or once the floor is open, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can ask a question directly. And then the very final housekeeping note is just that we are recording today's session. So you or any of your colleagues that might be interested are free to view the meeting following today's live event. It'll be available at our website hopefully tomorrow, if I can get it up that quickly. So with that, let me pass the mic over to Raj to start us off.
Thank you, Kelly. And welcome, everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces and a lot of new faces. It's just wonderful, I think, what's going on in terms of the expansion of a more caring, conscious way of thinking about business. Because there's a lot of challenges in the world that we're facing right now. But the answer to that really has to be, or has to include in a very significant way, business being thought about and done in a different way. And I think the topic of culture is a really critical one, because that really determines the experience that we have with business. As employees, certainly, but also as customers and as community members, etc. So it's really the human interface between the business and people. And so it's extremely important. In fact, we launched a podcast, Timothy Henry and I. He was one of our board members, and we co-wrote the Conscious Capitalism Field Guide with Thomas X. Schmidt. So we've started a podcast called The Conscious Capitalists. And I think we're up to about 7 episodes, but the last 2 were on culture. So I've been thinking a lot about this. Of course, the importance of culture is, I would say, somewhat widely understood, but still a bit of a blind spot, I would say, for many companies. Right? They focus on strategy and they focus on operations, all of which are important. But you may have heard the now famous quote from Peter Drucker, almost a cliche, where he said, "Culture eats strategy for lunch." Right? And we think maybe it doesn't even wait till lunch in some cases. It eats it for culture is so important. I've been teaching for 35 years. There's no large company's strategy that is a secret to any MBA student or really anybody in the world. Strategy is important, but everybody knows your strategy. But why can't we replicate those great companies in the world? Because the cultures are unique and they're homegrown. The other side of it, which is unfortunate, is that business schools very rarely actually put much emphasis on this. I don't know very many business schools that even have a whole course on culture, what it is, how do you create it, how do you sustain it, what are the qualities of a culture. So again, it's one of those things that we ignore, even though that it's one of the most important things in business. There's a lot of evidence and data showing that a great culture, an adaptive, caring culture actually has tremendous performance implications. The classic work on this was done by Cotter and Heskett, where they looked at differentiating between two kinds of cultures, what they call constructive and adaptive, we would call more conscious, versus aggressive and unadaptive, which are all focused on numbers and performance and so forth. And they tracked the performance of companies over time. In terms of revenue growth, there was about a 4-to-1 ratio. I forget the time period, I think it was about 15 years, but 4 times greater revenue growth, about 14 times greater stock price appreciation. And the net income growth was just hundreds of times more. It was quite dramatic. So there's no question. And if you think about it, it's very logical, right? I mean, the impact of culture on the employee experience, the level of engagement, the level of turnover, etc., is dramatic. And that has to then translate into performance. So culture is important not only for the lived experience that people have at our company, but also in terms of likely we are to be able to succeed. I don't want to get too academic here. I mean, the classic work academically on this was done by Edgar Schein at MIT. And actually, there's a paucity of research, I would say. It's not a big, huge area for scholarship. But Edgar's model really had 3 levels of it. But cultures really, there's the artifacts, which is it's like an iceberg model, really. This is what you see, right? The visible part of the culture, right? The architecture, the way people dress, the way people speak, what kinds of stories they tell, what is considered heroic, what is considered worth celebrating, what are the ceremonies and rituals, what's kind of the feel of the place, right? So those are kind of the artifacts, what we see. And underneath that are the values that actually inform that. Now, the values can get tricky because many companies have espoused values. Here is what we care about, and they put them on a wall. But as Bob might share later, it's one thing to put them on a wall, another thing to install them in people's hearts so that they actually are the lived values, right? So sometimes the values differ from what the artifacts are. In other words, here's how people behave, here's how our leaders say what our values are, and then underneath that are the basic assumptions and beliefs, which then give rise to those values, which then gives rise to the artifacts. So what we really want ultimately is all of those to be in alignment, right? So what we believe, what we say, and espouse in terms of values, and then how we behave and how we show up day to day. We need full alignment between those two. And I would say that's relatively rare. Most companies don't have that because, again, you've got some words on a wall that were created by the leadership team or maybe by a consultant, and then you have what actually happens and how people behave, and then what are the underlying mental models and beliefs behind that. But what we're talking about here is what are the attributes of a conscious culture, or the cultures that exist within most conscious businesses. And I would say those are what we would call caring cultures. Caring is at the root of these, whereas traditional cultures are all about numbers and performance and metrics and so forth, right? And we use carrots and sticks as a metaphor. How do we get people to do things? Conscious companies have cultures that actually put people at the center. As Herb Keller said, the business of business is people, yesterday, today, and forever. And that's a company that's a great embodiment of the power of culture, Southwest Airlines. So caring is at the center. The greatest scholar we have on that is Jane Dutton at Michigan, who's done a lot of work on compassion and caring at work. And as Jane puts it, human beings are born to care. And our institutions either amplify or they depress our capacity for caring. So in other words, I can show up and exhibit more caring and actually have that caring be embodied in what the company does. Or I can go up and put on my mask and armor and go to battle and fight for market share and shareholder value, in which case caring is out the window. And that's really the norm. Most companies. The way that I put it is that we are all here to care for each other. And business is a way we can do that at scale. In Bob's normal life, he can take care of, 10, 20 people. But through his businesses now, he's got hundreds of thousands of people's back And it's really amplifying his caring into the world. And that's true of every business, if that's the energy we're bringing to the business. It's a way of scaling caring. It can also be a way of scaling suffering. Because if we bring that mentality to it, we're going to end up using people, squeezing people, even abusing people to achieve our personal goals. And their experience of our business will actually lead to suffering, will lead to shorter lives, etc. There's lots of, I mean, that's part of the reason why I wrote the Healing Organization. The amount of suffering out there is extraordinary. And a lot of it is because of the way in which we do business. The way we work isn't working. There's tremendous financial distress out there. As we know, even at a time of economic boom, about half the people in this country are really struggling paycheck to paycheck. There's also, of course, all the other sort of health aspects too. Heart attacks are 20% higher on Mondays. Employee engagement is only 15% worldwide. Employee turnover is extremely high in most occupations, especially as we get closer to the customer-facing side. And in fact, the Japanese and Chinese have both had to invent new words that refer to death from overwork. An estimated 600,000 Chinese die from what they call gualosi, death from overwork. So the human cost of doing business is extremely high because of the absence of caring. Because we don't see people, we see them as functions and objects, right? So the way that I have talked about culture, and some of you may know, I tend to create acronyms for everything. And the acronym that I have for culture is tactile. Tactile, it means something that you can touch and feel, right? It's got a tangibility to it. Even though cultures are intangible, they're invisible. You can't put it in a box and say, here's a piece of our culture. But it's very, very tangible in terms of the experience. You walk into a Patagonia or a Whole Foods or a Container Store or Southwest Airlines or Trader Joe's or any of these great culture segments, and you can feel the positive energy. You can feel the enthusiasm, the love, the sense of purpose, etc. So it's very, very tangible in that sense. And tactile then stands for the qualities of a great purpose, which we won't get into the details of those, but I'll just list those out. So it starts with trust. Trust is the most important starting point. There has to be trust between people and leaders, between leaders, etc. You have to then, this is basically letting down your guard, right? And being able to be vulnerable and be human with each other. Without trust, you really don't create a culture where people are actually going to connect with each other at a deep level and actually be able to do meaningful things. My co-author Nilima used this phrase, vulnerability, which is a hallmark of a culture with high trust, right? People are willing to be vulnerable in front of each other, show their human side. That vulnerability is an ability. It's not a liability. Think about that. It's right in the word, right? It's vulnerability, and yet we treat it as a sign of weakness. And most companies, most cultures, most HR departments would frown upon people showing signs of vulnerability. And I'll talk later about Barry-Wehmiller. So one of the things that really sold me on the idea of writing that book with Bob is the vulnerability that I saw in that culture. Then the A is for authenticity. We say what we mean and we mean what we say. Now, we don't sugarcoat things, right? And there's a commitment to the truth, which is kind of rare. And the third is caring. There's genuine caring and compassion for all stakeholders, right? And that's central to it. Caring, as we know, is contagious. Emotions are as contagious as viruses are. And if you can create a caring culture, again, something I've learned also from Bob, the way we treat people at work impacts the way they treat their children and their families. Right? So there's a spillover effect. It's very, very infectious, and we can start positive infections. Then we have transparency. There are no secrets really in conscious culture. Integrity, of course, integrity is a baseline. It's given, again, not that common, right? High ethical standards, dealing with fairness and openness with all stakeholders. Learning, continuously evolving and growing. Doesn't matter what level of the organization you are, you're not stuck there. You can evolve and grow as long as you have the motivation, and the organization makes that possible. And then empowerment. Everybody is empowered. They have a lot of freedom. And this idea of freedom from and freedom to, right? So you have freedom from unnecessary bureaucracy, rules, restrictions. And then you have the freedom to innovate and create and think outside the box and come up with new ways of doing things. Okay? So people become self-managing, self-motivating, self-directing, and start to create and innovate. And again, a lot of these things I'm telling you, Barry-Wehmiller is almost a perfect embodiment of these ideas. If you read that book, you'll see. So examples of great cultures, I mentioned Southwest Airlines. You know, their stock market symbol is love. They've been around 50 years. They have never had a single strike, even though they're the most heavily unionized of all airlines. They have consistently grown quarter after quarter, year after year, almost every single quarter and year since then. They have never laid off a single employee, despite the tremendous cyclicality in the industry. Even after 9/11, even now, they're not laying off anybody. There's a tremendous commitment to the people. And culture is at the center of what they do. They even have a culture committee of 90 or so people elected by the employees. It's a really prestigious thing to be elected to that, because you become the keepers of that culture. And they've also shown us how do you sustain that culture through transitions in leadership. So Herb Kelleher and Colleen Barrett really were the architects and embodiments of that culture, but then everybody who has come since has actually sustained it and evolved it as well. Trader Joe's, I think all of us can relate to that as well. Kind of a fun culture that they have Container Store, right? A place that people love to go there, love to work there, etc. So there are many great examples of this. But ultimately, as I said, the leaders, especially the founders, the leader as the architects of a culture. Maybe they do it consciously, maybe it just happens, right? People start emulating the behavior and the attitudes of leaders. So leaders are architects, consciously or unconsciously. They are the stewards, and they are the embodiment of the culture, right? Herb Kelleher, and I got the chance to interview him some years ago. At the end of our interview, as he was walking to the parking lot, you know, it took him 40 minutes to get from his office on the 3rd floor to the parking lot, because he kept getting stopped every 3 feet by somebody saying, oh, because he had already retired, he had just come in, you know, and they wanted a picture with him, they wanted to get a hug from him, right? I mean, this is just the walls of that entire headquarters of Southwest plastered with pictures of people and their families, and pictures of people with Herb and with Colleen. As Colleen told me, you know, Herb was the dad and I was the mom. That's just how it was. This was a family, and there was tremendous love all around. Right? So again, leaders embody that, and that brings us to Bob Chapman, because I don't know of another leader other than Herb who embodies that culture and actually is responsible in a way, in a deep way, for creating the current culture. It wasn't always like this, believe me. Barry-Wehmiller was a very, very unhappy place for decades, you know, maybe 80 years. Or right, maybe close to 100 years before the culture turned around. And it turned around because partly Bob changed. And Bob went through some epiphanies that he will describe shortly. Just briefly, how we connected was that a number of people had started hearing about Bob and meeting Bob and visiting their plants in Wisconsin and other places, and getting completely inspired. And a few of them told him, Bob, you need to write a book about it. This is like the best kept secret. Nobody knows about this company. And he said, I don't know anything about writing books. So they connected me to him. And that's how I ultimately ended up, it was a few months later after we initially connected that I was able to then go to Phillips, Wisconsin and Green Bay, Wisconsin, and then St. Louis to visit some of their operations and meet with some of their people. And so Bob flew into Boston on his jet and had a team of 4 or 5 of his colleagues and made a presentation on the flight, and then we landed, and then I was taken to a meeting room, a conference room, with about 15 men, all from this plant, PCMC, that makes machinery that I think cuts paper, right, and makes cardboard boxes and whatnot. And then I was left alone with them. And so, you know, this company had been acquired by Barry-Wehmiller about 5-6 years earlier. So I just had a simple question for them. I just said, tell me how your life used to be and then how it changed when you were acquired by Bob Chapman and came out of that. And then there's silence for a few minutes. I said, what happened? And then I see people are, you know, sniffling, and there's tears running down a few of their faces. I said, wow, what did I do here? I asked a simple question, and I've got, you know, these are men in their 50s and 60s, you know, blue collar, small town in Wisconsin, probably high school educated or less, right? And if you can get men like that to cry in front of each other, you're doing something highly unusual, okay? To exhibit that level of vulnerability and then that level of emotional impact from a simple question. And then the stories started pouring out. What their life used to be in a manufacturing environment where it's highly cyclical, and these companies were struggling and dying, as many American manufacturing companies were and still are. and they would get laid off periodically, and they had no savings, and they didn't know when, if ever, they would get hired back. And meanwhile, they have families to take care of and mortgages to pay. And one of them said, I had no money, and we had a new baby, and I needed to buy infant formula. I went to the Green Bay Packers game and picked up aluminum cans and bottles, and I was carrying a big bag and turning them in, and that's how I was surviving somehow. And then life completely turned around. Bob Chapman came and bought our company. And now I have a future. My children have a future. I even saw the mayor of Phillips, Wisconsin. He said, that man saved our town. 600 people work for this company, and there are only 1,400 people who live in this town, which means every single life depends on that company. And that company was dying. It was about to die, and now it got turned around. And now all those people and that community and their children, everybody has a future. So that's the power of business. So that's what I saw. And I learned before the end of those 2 days that conscious capitalism, we have the 4 pillars, and we feel we understand what it takes to run a great caring business. But I learned at least 2 new things in those 2 days. One is the purpose doesn't have to be something that you're doing in the world with your customers. Doesn't have to be high tech. Doesn't have to be sexy, right? He said we make machines that make toilet paper. These are necessities, but nobody gets excited in the morning to say, let's go to work and make some more of those machines. He said our purpose is our people. We measure success by the way we touch the lives of people. I said, wow, this universalizes conscious capital. Because a lot of people say, oh, we're in a business that can never have a higher purpose, right? We make salt, we make mundane thing. Yeah, you always have people. And if you put people at the center, so I started to think about purpose as sort of 2 engines of a plane, right? There's the people-centered and the product-centered purpose and a people-centered purpose. And you need both, ideally, but you can fly on just one. And if you had to pick one, it has to be the people. Right? And then the second was around leadership. To me, leadership, even conscious leadership, was about giving people a great experience at work, so they have a sense of meaning and purpose and empowerment, and they're doing wonderful things. But it kind of stopped 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And the way Bob puts it, leadership is the stewardship of the lives entrusted to us. And the way we lead impacts the way people live. So it's not just about what happens at work, it's what happens in their lives. Again, these were much richer and deeper ways of thinking. And then, of course, the third is the culture. So I'm just going to now turn it over to Bob. Taken more than enough time here, and ask a question. So Bob, I know that you had a more traditional background, accounting degree for undergrad. You worked for an accounting firm. You got an MBA at Michigan, and then for quite a few years you were, I would say, a more traditional leader. And then you changed. Something happened to Bob. Remember that movie, What About Bob? What happened to Bob? So please tell us about your journey towards the leadership approach that you came to embody over time.
I'm always asked that question, Raj, about how did I go from what I call traditional management? Because again, in relative terms, I was being very successful with traditional techniques that I'd learned in business school, that I experienced when I got out into the real world of management. And I started in 1997 when I had an experience buying a company in South Carolina. And I was watching people play March Madness and having fun. And the closer it got to 8 o'clock, the fun went out of their body. And I said to myself, in hindsight, why can't business be fun? Why do we call it work? Okay? Because when do people express their gifts fully? When they're having fun. So that was the first. Second is being in church. My mentor was the rector of our church. Always amazed at how he could inspire us with a sermon. But one day I paused after the service and I looked at my wife, Cynthia, and I said, oh my God, Cynthia, Ed has only got us for 1 hour a week. We have people for 40 hours a week. We are 40 times more powerful to influence people's lives than our faith is. So as I walked out of the church that day, I came away with the expression, business could be the most powerful force for good in the world if we simply cared about the people we had the privilege of leading. That was the second, but the one everybody remembers is the third. I was at a wedding. Many of us have been at a wedding. I've given away 2 of my precious daughters. I know how meaningful it is. And so I was at a wedding of a friend, and as I watched this ceremony, and I saw how everybody thought this young man and this young lady getting married were so precious, beautiful, how proud the family was, all of a sudden it came to me that all 12,000 people that work for us around the world, just like that young man and young lady, are somebody's precious child. They're not engineers, accountant, receptionists, machine operators, assemblers. They are somebody's precious child who was brought into this world with the intention of the parents that that child be able to be whatever they were meant to be and appreciated for whatever that was. So that was the profound. When I stopped seeing people as functions for my success, people I needed for my success, but somebody in my care whose life I would touch profoundly changed me. And those three together, and I can't believe the way they occurred. I happen to believe, you know, I'm an accountant. Accountants don't think this way, okay? So I believe that some higher power has blessed us with the message of the way we were intended to live and work together, where we genuinely care for each other and create human value and economic value in harmony. And so that led to us deciding that how are we going to make sure that this doesn't die with me, okay? That this blessing that I was given would live on beyond my time. And so we created a university to create disciples. We articulated our beliefs. We created disciples through our university that would embrace these principles of caring and convert them from managers. And again, I believe managers are people who manipulate others for their success, to leaders who are stewards of the lives entrusted to them. So that journey from management to leadership, we started teaching classes. And what I call here is when we started teaching people how to be leaders, a lot of it came from Cynthia and my parenting of 6 kids. Because as Simon Sinek and I frequently say, there's no difference between leadership and parenting. Parenting is the stewardship of these precious lives that come into our families through birth, adoption, second marriage that we all take very seriously. What is leadership? The stewardship of these precious lives that walk into our building, into our care around the world, who simply want to know that they matter, okay? And so those revelations that I had, this higher power, we realized that we had been given something that could profoundly heal the world, okay? Because our education system teaches us about shareholder value, about making profits, and success is money and power and position. And we believe, honestly, that, you know, at the end of the day, we're not going to be remembered for the machinery we built. We're going to be remembered for the lives we built. By allowing people to express their gifts and go home each night feeling valued in whatever their role is, so they could be good parents, good spouses, and good citizens of their community. And the interesting thing, when we began teaching our eclectic skill sets to convert managers into leaders, 95% of the feedback we got at our graduation ceremony for our university, internal university, was how it affected their marriage and their relationship with their kids, okay? Interesting, because it never occurred to me that the way we treat people at work is more important than their family doctor. And it never occurred to me that the way we treat people at work affects the way they go home and treat their spouse, the way they treat their kids, and the way they behave in our country. So when given, you know, I would say to all of you, I have never been more concerned about the state of our culture in this world, in our country, than I am right now, okay? And we could say it's COVID-19, we could say it's social unrest, we could say it's the political discourse. But honestly, I have been speaking for 10 years about the crisis we have in this country. The leadership, I call it leadership malpractice. Because before COVID-19, before the social unrest, okay, before those visible signs, we had the highest level of depression and anxiety we've ever had in this country. And yet we had full employment and we had peace in the world. So why? Because 88% of all people in this country feel they work for an organization that does not care about them. 3 out of 4 people in this country are disengaged in what they're doing. 65% of people would give up a salary increase if they could fire their boss, okay? Those are statistics I spoke about before COVID-19, before the social unrest. So all COVID-19 did, and the social unrest, is ignite this unrest that was under the surface of financial success, strong stock market, low unemployment, you know, good economic factors. Underneath it was a lot of depression, anxiety, frustration, divorces, dysfunctioning families. And we say, what's wrong with kids today? What's wrong with kids today? There's nothing wrong with the kids today. What's wrong with the families today? These families, most families are part of some organization that is using them, okay? And they're coming home not feeling valued, and they're not as caring and loving to the people in their life because of the way they've been treated for 40 hours a week. So that is what ignited our journey from I call management, which is the manipulation of people for my success, to seeing those 12,000 people in our span of care as somebody's precious child and treating them like I would like my 6 kids treated if they were part of any organization. So that's kind of the version. And just in the last week, as I was talking to Bill Urey of Harvard about our concerns about what's going on in our country and in the world, Tom Friedman wrote an article in the New York Times, and he hit it on the nail, in my opinion. He basically said, you know, we basically have a poverty of dignity, not a poverty of money. We have a poverty of dignity, okay? And he said, people, you can give people a job, you can pay them, you give benefits, and they'll say thank you. But if you humiliate them, you will ignite a level of anger that you never have seen before. And he quoted Nelson Mandela and others who've taught. So what we have in this country is not a poverty of wealth. We have a poverty of dignity. People in our organizations do not feel valued, not because they're bad people and leaders, because we have never taught them in our education system the skills to care for the people you have the privilege of leading. And so until we change, you know, so we have a leadership institute where we go out and help companies embrace caring, American Airlines, Meyer Food Stores, Shell Oil Company. We're working with these companies to transform from management to leadership. But honestly, it is so desperately needed in this world because we are self-destructing for economic gain. My view is we had the Industrial Revolution, which Raj talks eloquently about how it elevated our communities, our society, gave us enough wealth to educate and provide for our families. But it was always about economic value creation. It was never about human dignity. We took a craftsman from a farm and we put him in a factory to put on a hubcap. So, well, we paid him well, so he ought to be happy, right? We know that money is not the source of happiness. We know a meaningful job doing with people you enjoy is the #1 source of happiness in the world. So we are denying the world the very thing they want the most, which is feeling valued. And that is, to me, what a conscious business does. Its product is its people. I was interviewed by Washington University organizational development professors for about an hour and a half a few years ago. And after an hour and a half interview, they said, you're the first CEO we've ever talked to that never talked about their product. And I said, excuse me, we've been talking about our product for the last hour and a half. It is our people, okay? I will not go to the grave proud of the machinery we built. I will go to my grave proud of the people that built that machinery. So that is what truly human leadership does. And we have to teach people how to care. You can't ask people to care because everybody wants to care. You have to teach people to care, and it becomes contagious, as Raj said. And that's what we found in our company. When I care for Mary or Bill, they care for Sue and Joe, okay? We find it's contagious. It's a natural instinct to care, which we beat out of people through management, bosses, and supervisors. And so, you know, to me, we are self-destructing for economic gain because we think happiness is money, power, and position. We celebrate people who write checks to charity as wonderful people. The greatest act of charity is not the checks we write. It's the way we treat the people we have the privilege of leading. That is the greatest act of charity in this world. And that would heal the brokenness we feel every day that no government can change, no legislative body can change, but all of us on this call today, if we simply looked at the people we have the privilege of leading as somebody's precious child that's been placed in our care, and we know that the way we treat them will be material to their health and the vibrancy of their marriage and the health of their kids, it would profoundly change the way we would look at this. The problem is you can't ask them to do that. You need to teach them, and that's what we do. We teach people how to actualize caring, and we do that. The #1 thing we teach them, again through parenting, is empathetic listening skills. The greatest act of caring is not talking to somebody. The greatest act of caring is listening to somebody with empathy. And the other thing we teach that's so foundational is recognition and celebration. looking around, shining light in the organization, looking for the goodness and holding it up and saying thank you in thoughtful, meaningful, timely ways. So we teach those skills and we look for the goodness and we try and drown out the inevitable misbehavior you get in any organization, any family, because we're constantly looking for the goodness and holding it up and saying thank you. So Raj's ability to kind of put these pieces together with Conscious Capitalism, to come on the journey with us, has been incredibly meaningful to us, because I believe business could be the most powerful force for good in the world if we simply had the skills and the courage to care for those we had the privilege of leading.
Wow, thank you, Bob. And I just wanted to ask you about the 2008 financial crisis, because a lot of companies have cultures that appear to be caring cultures. And then when times get tough, right, people get thrown overboard. It was different. I mean, until then, there were a lot of skeptics inside Barry-Wehmiller about what you were talking about, right? Because they had been burnt. You know, they say a cynic is a disappointed idealist. There are a lot of people who had heard happy talk from different leaders over time, but chose not to believe it to protect themselves. So if you could just share what happened in 2008, that was kind of an existential moment for the company, because there was almost like a depression that happened in the capital goods manufacturing industry at that time.
Well, thank Raj. I think just as background, we had been on this journey. We've been on this journey for about 15 years. So we were 2 or 3 years into this journey of truly human leadership. We had established what we call the guiding principles of leadership. The overriding statement is we measure success by the way we touch the lives of people. Okay. And so we articulated our beliefs, and these came about the time of Enron, who had beautiful statements on the walls. They just didn't live the values that were on the wall. So one of Rhonda Spencer, our chief people officer, said to me, Bob, Enron had great statements on the walls, and we have now great statements. How are we going to be different than Enron? I said, and I took that challenge. I said, Rhonda, we're not going to put them on the wall. We're going to put them in people's heads and hearts. And so I began traveling around the world, sharing our vision, asking for feedback. Are we living these visions? What can we do differently? I could tell you all 15 unbelievable stories I heard by listening to our people, how they felt relative to our values. So those guiding principles of leadership had become pretty much embedded in me when 08, 09 hit. And and it was like September when it's kind of the financial crisis started in 08. And we're in capital goods, big machinery. So we had a pretty decent backlog going into this crisis. We're financially solid. So I went to my board meeting in January, and we have a very professional outside board. And I walked into my board meeting, and the first thing my board says, don't you have to lay off people? I said, why do you ask that? And they said, well, because everybody's letting people off. Don't you have to let people go? I said, I don't think so. I think we're going to be okay. And then about a month later, I was traveling in Italy, at our operations in Italy. I got an email that a very large consumer products company, which had a 20-some+ million order, very big order for us, had put on hold a major project. And all of a sudden, not only were orders slowing down, but our backlog was disappearing, which our backlog had given us confidence. So I sat in my hotel room, but I had changed the way I thought, because I'd been preaching our guiding principle of leadership so much in listening sessions. I said, if we measure success by the way we touch the lives of people, and we let them go in this crisis, we're going to hurt people, which caused me to go to the next level. Because again, before our guiding principle of leadership, before these revelations, I would have done what everybody else did. It's not personal. We got to adjust the size, downsize, right size, lay off people. It's just things you have to do. It's part of management, right? But I sat in my hotel room and said, we're going to hurt people and we can't do that. So that caused me to think differently. And the thought occurred to me, what would a caring family do if a family had a crisis develop in the family? We'd all pitch in and take a little pain so no one team member would be hurt. And so a thought occurred to me, what if everybody took a month off without pay? And that allowed us to get through this crisis without letting anybody go. I emailed back to the United States. Okay, guys, I got this idea. Surfaced because I started thinking about I don't want to hurt people. I emailed back and said, okay, come up with a program. How could we ask people to take a month furlough? But in return, you can take it anytime you want, even though it may be hard for us, anytime you want, so it's a good quality family time for you. Well, by the time I landed back in the United States, our team was ready to deploy this, and the reaction was unbelievable. People felt a huge sense of relief. This cloud of being laid off and the uncertainty of the family disappeared like that. And the other thing that was unbelievable is that, okay, I'm going to lose 1/12 of my salary. But you know, we get some time with the kids, we get some time to take a vacation. And we had people, the other feeling was, by me taking a month off, Bill and Mary, who sit next to me, who have 3 kids, are not going to lose their job. So it became an act of gratitude to other people, a charitable act to help other people not get hurt. And so people were more than willing to take a month off without pay because it helped save those people. Nobody ever thinks about the collateral damage it's done when you do a layoff, because you may survive a layoff, but 2 people next to you, you see those empty desks, you know, they had families, they had kids, and they're in hardship. And it doesn't feel good to survive a layoff and see the 2 people that you enjoyed next to you. So the collateral damage, and am I next? So the net effect is that we implemented this, and we had people volunteer to take other people's time off who were better off financially, who knew some people who would be hurt. The acts of charity were unbelievable. And our culture went up. Instead of going down, our culture went up because people felt safe. They felt their colleagues next to them were safe, and that we were going to get through this together as a team. It was, I had no idea how people would react to losing a month pay. And guess what? When we started to come out later in the recession, our revenue started going up dramatically because why? We had actually validated our culture instead of damaging it. And the talent we kept. And so we didn't do it to keep the talent. We did it because we did not want to hurt the people whose lives were entrusted to us. So that was those revelations caused me to think differently than I'd been taught and that I experienced. And so that story that Raj asked me to share is the story that Simon Sinek tells all around the world, because we are so used to this traditional behavior, layoffs, downsizing, right-sizing, it's just business, they'll find another job. But we are actually, if you've ever interviewed people who have lost their job in a layoff, it is a demoralizing time. They go back to their family with the uncertainty of the future of their financial health, and kind of the rejection. So that was a profound moment to validate our culture, but it was caused by the fact that we'd been out sharing our vision of caring and stimulated a totally different way of embracing the challenge we all faced.
Thank you, Bob. I'm going to stop shortly. I think we're going to leave some time for questions, but I did want to ask, first of all, I wanted to mention the financial performance. As I said, this company was struggling for a lot of its history, but ever since the culture evolved in this way, I think if I remember the numbers, 25 years of a compounded 17% growth in the stock price, which by the way, is better than Berkshire Hathaway and many, many others. So there's always, you do the right things and good outcomes will emerge, but that wasn't the reason why they did all this. They did it because they are called on to care for people, but good things do happen as a consequence of that. Bob, one of the things you and I share, and I had this realization a couple of years ago when I worked with a coach for the first time, and she heard my life story and my upbringing and my work and how it evolved towards this whole arena. And she said, do you realize that you have been honoring your mother with your work for the last 15 years, that you spent 45 years trying to prove yourself worthy of your father. And then you discovered your real path, which was to bring her energy and her unconditional love and care into the world of business. And I know I've heard you talk about your mother as well. And I lost my mother last year, and I think your mother passed about 3 years ago. How do you feel your mother may have been, because you use this phrase, our mothers are the source of our goodness. And I know it's not true in every family. In some families, the father kind of plays that role. But would you share a little bit about your mother's influence on you?
Yeah, I would say to you, I was not close to my dad. He was a good person, but we just had nothing in common. My mother was my steward. She just really loved me unconditionally. And I would say to you, what came from that I think my mother gave me is the skill to care for others, okay? And I think that's a gift that is profoundly meaningful to my life. To look at others as someone who deserves the same respect and dignity as anybody else. So I think my mom was a simple Iowa farm girl. On her stone over her ashes in the park here is the expression, tomatoes 10 cents a pound. And that was the story she told 1,000 times to us and her grandkids about being an Iowa farm girl and having to go door to door to sell tomatoes at 10 cents a pound to get enough money to buy a store-bought dress. And so that kind of embodies the simplicity and of my mother's, who was an inspiration. But I would say to you, one of my gifts, I think, that came from that is I'm an eternal optimist. In my worst of times, I never give up hope, because I believe it is the responsibility of every leader, and whether you're at home or at work or our government, in our communities, is the responsibility of every leader to give those in their span of care a grounded sense of hope for the future. That is what leaders need to give us, a ground, not an artificial, a grounded sense of hope for the future. And I'll say one other thing that we talk about in my book and I teach at graduate school. The greatest growth in my life has been through the most traumatic experiences. And I have, every major challenge I've faced has been a tremendous strength for me in shaping the company. So as I said, we're not we are a privately held company, but we got kind of a public type share price. The Walton family is our biggest investor. They've got about 12%. So we have a share price. It trades at about 12 times earnings. And it's grown at, actually grown at 15% a year, compounded for 25 years, okay? Berkshire Hathaway is like 9.6%. So I would not say to you, I was teaching the Barry-Wehmiller case study at Harvard, and they asked me the question, is the reason your share price growth been so exceptional because of your culture or your business strategy? And I said, in all honesty, it is because of our business strategy. What we've done is we've amplified a good strategy with a good culture. We always say it's about people, purpose, and performance. Your first responsibility is the people in your care, okay? Around a purpose that inspires them to share their gifts. And then you have to create value. If you do not create value, you're putting at risk the very people in your care.
Thank you, Bob. I'm just going to end by saying Bob was the inspiration for the Healing Organization. He's acquired by this, I think, by now about 120 companies and never sold a single one. Mostly struggling businesses, turned them all around. And when I talked to him a few years ago and he told me how many he was planning 15 more companies, I said, Bob, I know, why do you need the aggravation? And you've got 26 children and grandchildren, why don't you, I know you don't need the money. But he said what he had said earlier, I will not be proud of the machines we build, but the lives we touch. And I said, Bob, you're not growing a business, you're spreading a healing ministry. Because when Bob Chapman comes to town, there's hope, there's future, right? Your children. So that I contrasted that with the traditional businesses like 3G Capital and others. When they grow, life gets grim, life gets difficult, life gets dark, right? People get laid off, life, work becomes tougher than ever. So I said, done right, business can be a place of healing. You can end the day physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and socially in a better place than when you came in. And you can be a source of healing for your customers and your communities. And you can be a force for healing in society. And so Bob really embodies that. And I'm really eternally grateful that we came together in this lifetime to do this meaningful work. And I'm going to turn it over now to Kelly and Bob to guide us through some Q&A. I know I don't have a hard stop at the top of the hour. Bob, I don't know about you, but since we ran a little long, I'm happy to stay a little long.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. We do have some questions, so we can move on to those and see how many we can get through. So the first question that came in was, when the pandemic hit, how did Barry-Wehmiller make sure that people across the organization were cared for? And was it different than what you were describing in 2008?
Well, when you, if you think about what you've done when the pandemic hit, how you cared for your family, we just looked at the 12,000 people in the world and we said our first responsibility is to care for our people. So there's nothing, the pandemic was just another one of the challenges. And so we've embraced practices. We've actually, I want to remind you, we have a very robust business model. we're not dependent on any one customer, any one technology, any one market. So our 08, 09 economic downturn, when we didn't let people go, our share price went up 11% that year. This year, our share price is going to go up 11 to 13%, okay? Not down 10 and then back up. So we have you can't be good to your people if you don't have a good business model, okay? You can't. And so I would say to you, the pandemic or the economic crisis, they're all challenges we're going to face. You know, competitors create challenges, health create challenges. This is just one. And so we've been good stewards. We've operated all over the world. People are still giving their heart and soul to making sure that we are serving each other and our customers. So we're going to get through this. We're probably going to have one of our strongest financial performances in our history, but further validating our culture because we didn't hurt people. Our business model has again sustained another economic shock that has hurt many major corporations, but we are going to get through this fine. So the pandemic, we've embraced all the practices. You know, we've respected people. A lot of people are working remotely, but our people came to the plant to work, to provide our product in what they considered to be safe and responsible conditions. We didn't force anybody to do anything. They did it for each other, okay? When you have a caring organization, people will do responsible things because they care not just for their own job, but for those people they work with, because they know by serving customers, that is the vitality. And so by helping each other, we get through this together. So we got through it. Well, again, this may be the pandemic may be the strongest financial performance we've had in our history.
That's great. Thank you. Another question for probably for both of you to comment. What happens when a company faces financial challenge that is inconsistent with conscious capitalism? So for example, how long can Southwest continue to operate without any layoffs? Isn't it sometimes necessary to make difficult choices for the overall good of the company?
Raj, go ahead. I'll let you be first.
No, I would love to hear you as well. Yes, short answer is yes. If the company is going to die, you know, then you have to, you know, everything is on the table at that point, right? But you don't make it the first resort. You know, I think 1980s was the first time when companies started laying off people simply to improve their balance sheet and to raise the share price. Because you had executives sitting on a bunch of stock options that would expire underwater unless they did something to bump the stock price. So, you know, things like that, right? I think as Simon says, in the military, we give medals to people who sacrifice themselves so others may gain. And in business, we often give bonuses to people who sacrifice others so they may gain. And that happens a lot, right? If you look at why people engage in these kinds of actions. So it's not a first resort, it's not a second resort, it's the last resort when it's a matter of the survival of that business, because everybody goes down. All the jobs are lost unless you have that lever. Now, you have to do it with love and care. As Bob would say, what if that person was your son and you had to let them go? How would you do it? Or your daughter, right? You would do it with love and care and try to help them find a suitable opportunity. And I know there's a Harvard case on Barry-Wehmiller. And that is one of the situations that was highlighted. There was a business that was in that situation. But the way they did it was exemplary. You know, the way they carefully and caringly let people go and then hired back most of them and got most of them other jobs. So I'll let Bob comment on that further.
Yeah, I mean, I you know, with 110 operations around the world and all the different markets we serve, you're occasionally going to hit a market that changes dramatically. Despite all your efforts, just changes dramatically. As we've seen in the airline industry right now, the hotel industry and others. And, you know, so I always say, it's incredibly important you have a robust business model. I learned good news, well, the bad news, my dad died when I was 30 and I stepped into running the business. But what that happened is I had a chance to make my mistakes early. And I made some serious mistakes in the 1980s that I learned from, okay? So in 1987, after recovering from that, I sat down and designed a business model that was safe for our people, and it would have a balance of products, markets, technology, never dependent on any one customer. So if something happened in the world, we'd get through it. So again, it was tested in 08, 09, it was tested this year. So as leaders of your business, you've got to have a business model. And I use this story all the time. There's an old expression, you need to get the right people on the bus. I think you need to build a safe bus, which is your business model. And you need drivers who know where they're going and how to get there safely, which is your leaders. And then anybody that gets on the bus is going to be fine, okay? Because you got a safe bus and you have good drivers, okay? So I would use that analogy. It is incredibly important that in each of your businesses, you assess the risk to your people, okay? And then you do everything you can do to reduce that risk, because your first responsibility is not to the shareholders, it is to the people you ask to join your company and share their gifts with you because of the gifts they have. So that's the way I look at it. You've got to have a robust business model. That doesn't mean we're perfect. And the case study that Harvard uses is a business we bought out in Flagstaff, Arizona, that depended heavily on one particular pharmaceutical company, and like 40% of their sales. And that company changed overnight. Okay, they just changed their buying decision, and they lost 40% of the revenue. The good news is we spent 6 months brainstorming how not to hurt people, because that wasn't their mistake, it was our mistake, depending on one customer. At the end of the day, with a company about 120, I think we let 23 people go, but we did it in such a compassionate way. We remained committed to every 21 of those 23 people to make sure they found a job in the time of our economic transition with us, so we didn't hurt the people, okay? So we felt a responsibility, not just to the people that stayed, and actually the city of Flagstaff gave us an award for the way we dealt with that challenge. Now, that company has recovered. Everybody was invited back who left. It's now a case study at Harvard, because, you know, again, we can try our best to design a safe bus, but there are sometimes conditions that happen beyond our, you know, ability to think through it. And then the question is, the most common question that relates to this I'm asking is, what do you do about the people that don't get it? And I said, treat them like you would like your son or daughter treated. And always people say to me, well, that would be different. And I say, why is that different? That's somebody's son or daughter you're dealing with. So if our standard of care is treat nobody less than you would want your son or daughter treated if they were in the same situation. That is our standard of care.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I know it's the top of the hour, and so we may have some people that need to jump. I'm going to do a really quick plug for our next 2 events, just because I want to make sure that people are aware of what's on tap from the Boston chapter. Next week, we actually kind of have a part 2 about culture. We have Peggy Burns from Harvard, who's going to be sharing her methodology for fostering joy in the workplace. So that should be really fun and exciting. And Peggy joined us today, so it'll be a very natural follow-on event next week. So please sign up for that. And then our Q4 event will be on December 17th. We're going to have Daniel Friedland, who's an author of a book called Leading Well from Within. And he's going to speak to us with one of the co-founders of Laz Parking. And they're going to focus on conscious leadership. So I just wanted to get that in there.
Kelly, I do have to leave. I do have another meeting that started. And so I'm honored anytime to be on the stage of Conscious Capitalism with my brilliant co-author, Raj. I feel blessed to know him. But honestly, I want to leave you all with the thought. We don't need to change parties, governments, presidents, senators. We as business leaders just need to care for the people we lead. And we would begin healing in this country tomorrow. We don't need to raise taxes, pass laws. We just need to learn to care for the people. And this world with our children, we're bringing children into, will be a profoundly more caring world for them. So it's up to us, not the politicians. There's nothing the politicians can do as powerful as we can do, because we can show people they matter, and they will behave dramatically different in our society. So we can end the poverty of dignity in our country tomorrow by simply embracing the ideas in our book, Everybody Matters, the healing organization. We know how to do it. We're doing it. I'm privileged to share it all with you. And I hope you will join us in this journey to begin healing so our children have a chance to be a part of an organization that cares about them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Raj, do you want to stick around for people, or do you?
Yeah, I can stay for about 10 minutes. You know, our book is called Everybody Matters, and the extension of that, I say everybody matters and everybody needs to win. So we need to create businesses where there are no losers, right? If somebody is losing in our system, that means we're not quite there.
Absolutely. So we do have one question that has come in, and so this person was mentioning they were struck by Bob's comment that a company's greatest product is their people. It says, I come from a corporate culture where they ascribed their people as their greatest assets, not products. Assets is more transactional language, and it confers investments and profits, not empathetic feelings there. So what's your suggested prescription for changing the language to help transform our business and social culture?
Yeah, no, it's important. Language does matter. And when we call people resources or assets, that's putting them in the same category as plant and equipment, right? And even our department's human resources. Human beings are not a resource. A resource, when you use it, it depletes and it burns out, it's gone, right? It's like a lump of coal. The more you use it, the less you have. Human beings in the right setting are the source. We're the source of infinite caring and infinite creativity. We're the most powerful form of renewable energy this planet has ever seen. What one human being is capable of manifesting, we have divine capacities. But when you treat us as a resource, we become a resource. We burn out, we deplete, we're done. Right? We chew them up and spit them out, as many companies do. But when you treat people in the right way, they become the source. And so I think language does matter. I think most conscious companies don't have HR departments, they have people departments. And those departments are elevated in their importance in the company. And the CEO has direct line of sight into those. So I do think we need to change our language and treat people in a different way with respect and dignity, as Bob was talking about. That's the one big thing that is missing. And the one thing that I'm realizing now more and more, and we write about this in the Healing Organization, we have kind of a caste system in most companies. Now, I come from India, where one of the worst things I think about the Indian heritage is the caste. Is you're born into these tiers. And if you're born at that bottom tier, then your life is almost guaranteed to be miserable. And we have that in most companies when we look at the hourly workers versus the salaried and professional managerial workers, employees, right? And the lived reality is extremely different. The turnover is much higher. The engagement is much lower. There's no path to growth and progression. There's no investment in your capacities. As I said, many companies in retail and call centers, turnovers are in the triple digits, sometimes in the high triple digits, 50, 100%. So we need to change that, right? So we need to make it that every person in the company is treated with respect and dignity, and they have the opportunity to grow and evolve, which means paying people better and providing a pathway for them to grow and the opportunity for them to grow. One of the other companies we feature is HEB in the book. And it was started by the grandmother of the current chairman. It was started by Florence Butt. And their culture is one in which they say to the senior executives, please pay our people as much as possible, not as little. Most companies look at people as a cost, right? Not only do we treat them as a resource or an asset, but as a cost to be minimized, as opposed to, we need to enable them to lead dignified and healthy lives and take care of their families. And we design a business model around that. HEB has prices that are lower than Walmart, and yet they pay their people far better, right? And they compete. And this is the largest company in Texas, actually, $25 billion in revenues. It's a grocery chain. So again, it comes from the consciousness of leadership and what your commitment is to treat people with respect and dignity. Costco is another good example of that, where they have always paid way above, paid double of Walmart and 60% higher than Sam's Club, and provided great benefits, healthcare, and all of that. It's non-negotiable for the leader. And when Wall Street says you are stealing money from shareholders because we know you can hire people for that. And he said, well, I believe that people should be able to look after their families and lead a decent life. If you don't like that idea, then you should not own our stock. And by the way, our sales per employee are 3 times higher, even though we pay double. And by the way, our employee turnover is 7% a year compared to 70% for Walmart. So we save a ton of money on recruiting and training and so forth. So again, there's a mindset, there's a business model that goes with it. If we view business as just profit maximization, we're going to view people as a cost to be minimized. we view business as a place of meaning and purpose and respect and dignity and taking care of everybody, then we figure out the win-win-win-win-win. Right? If somebody is winning, then you're not there. If somebody is not winning, if somebody is losing.
That makes sense. I don't want to keep you over, Raj. So do you want to just end here? And
Okay, let me just look through the questions and see if there was anything
sure.
that I felt. There's a thing about feed the hungry. How do we inspire leaders across the world to prioritize adoption of a caring culture if they're not yet hungry to do so? That's always a challenge. You know, there are a lot of leaders who think the consciousness of the people who are currently in leadership roles, whether it's in government or whether it's in most corporations, traditional corporations, right? Shareholder value, profit maximizing. They bought into that hook, line, and sinker, and they rose and succeeded in that system, right? Which means that their value system is one that is at that consciousness of money and power being the definition of success. And most of them have done well under that, because most of those companies pay their executives and leaders quite well while they squeeze everybody else. So they are not at the consciousness to see this. Right? So as far as they're concerned, they're doing fine, and therefore there's not a problem. So unless they have an epiphany or an awakening like Bob did, I mean, Bob was that kind of leader for many, many years, but he had these awakenings, and there was a seed inside him which exists in most of us. Unless you are a sociopath, there is that seed, but that has been suppressed. You know, there's a loss of innocence. There's a loss of, you know, your humanity as you get into this. You know, remember, business is kind of like warfare, the way we talk about it, and the way we practice it. We borrowed the hierarchical organizational structure, command and control form of leadership, the language of strategy, tactics, operations, front lines, headquarters, staff line. These are all military terms. Why? Because when we started having large companies, the only large organizations that existed were armies. And so we thought this is how you manage and lead large numbers of people, right? But that mindset came across. Business as war, competitor as the enemy, people as your soldiers, customers as the target, territory you're trying to capture. That mindset leads to suffering. Right? And we've got people with that mindset. It's a hyper-masculine world, the world of business. It's fused with masculine, which is why I wrote this book, Shakti Leadership, about the feminine, which is why I talk about honoring my mother with my work. That mother energy is what's missing in the world. We have too much of hyper-masculine, not even the healthy father energy. It's like the unhealthy father energy. Domination, aggression, winning at all costs. Right? So we have a lot of people who are in that mentality and that mode. We either think of business as war, which is a zero, not even a zero-sum game. That's a negative-sum game. Even the winner has lost in a war, right? Because you're just waiting for the next war. Or we think of it as a game, which is win-lose. Business is not a game. It's not war. It's not a math problem like economists have made it. And it's not a machine, like a lot of engineering types and, you know, the sort of industrial, was it Frederick Taylor, scientific management and all. Business is the most human activity that we engage in. Business is a way we care for each other. We meet each other's real needs. In a free society, governments don't do that. Businesses are given the opportunity, but therefore the responsibility to meet our needs. When you meet somebody's needs in a genuine, caring way, you heal them. But when you view them as an object for your success, you're going to use them. Whether they're a customer, you're going to trick them into buying, which is why I got disillusioned with marketing, even though I have a PhD in marketing, right? You're looking at them as an object and you want them to do what they like to do. So we view business as a way to serve yourself and use others. You're going to cause suffering. If you view business as a way to express yourself and serve others, you're going to spread healing. So I think that's a problem when we don't have leaders of that mindset. We need to have, you know, boards of directors need to appoint leaders who actually care about those things. Or we have to figure out how to evolve those leaders. So that's I think conscious capitalism would spread like wildfire were it not for these breaks that exist. Breaks really are the existing incumbent boards of directors and leaders who have done extremely well according to their own value system. If all you care about power and money, you get a ton of power and money. You don't see the suffering, or you can rationalize it away, right? But that's just how markets work. No, markets don't have to work like that.
That's true. Thank you, Raj. Really, really appreciate all your time and insight on all of this. And I know we thanked Bob, but thank you so much.
Sure, you're very welcome. And looks like you've got a great series of speakers coming. So congratulations on that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being a part of this this series. So much appreciated.
You're welcome. All the best to everybody. Good to see you all. Thank you for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.